The conference room was exceptionally quiet, its double-paned glass walls insulating the space from the steady, chaotic hum of the operations floor outside. It was exactly 10:20 in the morning. Raymond Vance sat at the polished mahogany table, keeping his eyes on the digital clock mounted on the wall. He did not need to look at the paperwork resting between them, because he already knew the content by heart. For the fourth consecutive year, the figures remained completely unchanged. Across the table, Brenda Jenkins, the Director of Human Resources, adjusted her thin glasses and offered a practiced, sympathetic smile that did not reach her eyes. To her right sat Preston Fowler, the 39-year-old manager of the Operations Division. Preston wore a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit and held an expensive leather notebook, but his eyes were fixed on his tablet screen. He had spent the last 10 minutes avoiding Raymond's gaze, preferring to scroll through emails rather than face the senior systems administrator who had kept his entire department afloat. Brenda cleared her throat, her voice carrying the smooth, rehearsed cadence of someone reading from an official training manual. She explained that after a thorough review of the national market data and the current corporate structure, they had determined that Raymond's role was stable. She slowly slid the document forward. It printed his current salary of $74,000 in clean black ink. Brenda stated that based on their internal evaluation, this compensation was fully aligned with the market rate for a senior systems administrator in their region. Raymond did not reach for the paper. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, maintaining a calm and measured posture. He had been with Synergistic Systems for 17 years, and he had heard this exact phrasing too many times before. Every year, he was told that his position was stable, as if stability was a justification for financial stagnation. He knew that several younger administrators who had been hired within the last 3 years and possessed only a fraction of his experience were already earning significantly more than him. Yet HR remained rigid in their refusal. Raymond spoke slowly, his tone professional and entirely free of resentment. He pointed out that over the past 12 months, his operational duties had expanded significantly. He had taken on full oversight of the critical database synchronization systems, managed client escalations directly, and maintained a weekend standby schedule that frequently interrupted his personal life. He had single-handedly prevented several major system outages that could have cost the firm millions of dollars. Raymond reminded them that when the database migration failed last winter, he had stayed in the office for 36 straight hours to rebuild the index tables, saving the company from violating its service level agreements with their top clients. He had performed this extra work without asking for overtime pay, believing that his dedication would be recognized during the annual review. Preston finally looked up from his tablet, offering a brief nod but keeping his tone dismissive. He thanked Raymond for his dedication, calling him an invaluable asset to the team. However, Preston added that compensation decisions were dictated by broader organizational structures and strict budget caps. He explained that they had to maintain consistency across the entire division, and there was simply no room for salary adjustments at this time. Preston spoke at length about the department's overhead costs, using complex financial terms to justify the freeze while completely ignoring the millions of dollars in revenue that Raymond's work secured every day. He suggested that Raymond should feel satisfied with the security of his current position, given the volatile nature of the technology sector. Brenda closed her folder with a soft final snap. She suggested that they could revisit the compensation discussion during the next annual review cycle, urging Raymond to remain focused on his current objectives. Raymond did not argue. He knew that arguing with people who had already made their decision was a waste of energy. He stood up, adjusted his blue blazer, and thanked them for their time. As he walked out of the glass room, he caught his reflection. At 58 years old, he had spent nearly 2 decades building the backbone of this company's operations. He returned to the hallway, letting the heavy door click shut behind him. He realized that the meeting was not actually about money. It was about how they perceived his value. They viewed him as a permanent fixture, an automatic safety net that would always be there to catch their mistakes. As he walked back to his workstation, Raymond decided that he would no longer carry the weight of a system that refused to acknowledge his burden. His desk was located at the end of the operations floor, surrounded by three large monitors displaying real-time system performance. To anyone walking by, the screens looked boring, showing only rows of steady green indicator lights. But Raymond knew that this green state was an illusion. It was the result of constant manual intervention, custom software scripts, and hours of silent debugging that he performed outside of his official hours. The corporate leadership believed the systems ran themselves, unaware of how close the databases came to desynchronizing every single day. Raymond sat down, looking at the clean dashboards. He felt a strange sense of clarity replace the frustration that had built up over the last 4 years. The company had chosen to prioritize their rigid structures over his proven contributions. He realized that he had spent 17 years protecting them from the consequences of their own thin staffing and technical neglect. He decided it was time to let the systems speak for themselves without his silent protection. He would perform his duties to the letter of his contract, but he would no longer be their invisible savior. Raymond spent the afternoon performing his duties with meticulous precision, but he no longer worked ahead of the schedule. He resolved to follow the exact letter of his job description, doing only what was explicitly requested and nothing more. For years, he had been the invisible shield, intercepting database synchronization delays before they could trigger alarms. If a batch process lagged, he would write a quick patch, restart a service, or manually realign the tables at 3 in the morning. He had created a custom software application called VantSyncs, which he developed entirely on his personal computer at home. The utility acted as a middleware layer, translating and syncing the legacy databases with the new cloud infrastructure. Synergistic Systems had never paid for this software, nor did they own the intellectual property. Raymond had simply allowed them to use it under a verbal, non-exclusive agreement to make his own daily operations manageable. He had never signed an employment agreement that transferred his pre-existing intellectual property to the corporation, meaning the copyright of the code belonged solely to him. 9 months after Raymond's first raised denial 4 years ago, Preston had hired Keith Bradley, a fresh business school graduate with a Master of Business Administration degree. Keith was 32 years old, energetic, and highly skilled at creating colorful presentation slides. Preston had taken a strong liking to Keith, immediately placing him in high-visibility meetings and allowing him to present operational updates to the senior executives. Raymond had been instructed to train Keith, showing him how the data systems functioned. Raymond had patiently explained the database architecture, but Keith showed little interest in the underlying technology. Instead, Keith focused on the high-level dashboards, asking how to generate reports and metrics that made the department look efficient. Keith was interested in the appearance of stability, not the reality of it. He did not want to get his hands dirty with code or server logs, preferring to discuss synergies and operational optimization during executive briefings. Keith would talk endlessly about leveraging strategic alignments, cross-functional paradigm shifts, and disruptive data orchestrations, using these buzzwords in every team meeting. Raymond found it exhausting to listen to someone who spent 90% of his time talking and 10% of his time actually analyzing server logs. Keith's technical incompetence was hidden by Raymond's silent corrections. On one occasion, Keith mistakenly deleted a production folder thinking it was a temporary directory, and Raymond recovered it from backup logs in 12 minutes, keeping it completely secret so that Keith would not get fired. Raymond realized that by hiding Keith's mistakes, he was preventing the company from seeing the true risk of replacing an experienced systems engineer with a slide deck analyst. Raymond remembered the subsequent annual reviews. 3 years ago, Preston had told him that they were focusing on restructuring the department's pathways. 2 years ago, the excuse was that they needed to align job titles across the global parent company. Every conversation was filled with corporate jargon, and every conversation ended with the same result: no increase in his $74,000 salary. Meanwhile, Keith was promoted to senior analyst, his salary rising rapidly as he took credit for the operational stability that Raymond maintained. Raymond had watched Keith stand in front of the board of directors, explaining complex data flows as if he had built them himself, while Raymond sat quietly in the back row. Raymond knew that Keith could not read a basic database schema, yet the young analyst was earning $96,000, a full $22,000 more than Raymond, despite having only a fraction of the technical capability. Keith would frequently ask Raymond to compile technical data for his reports, which Keith would then present as his own work without offering any credit. At 1:15 in the afternoon, a critical data alert popped up on Raymond's screen. A major transaction batch from Horizon Shipping, one of their largest logistics partners, had stalled due to a timing offset in the legacy database. The company's servers processed over 90,000 transactions every single hour, linking warehouse inventories, customs clearances, and delivery routes. If the legacy system lagged, the cloud systems would experience database lockups, halting shipments across the country. Normally, Raymond would have logged into the server immediately, executed a custom script, and resolved the issue within 9 minutes, keeping the client completely unaware of the lag. This time, however, he did not intervene. He let the system run its natural course. He watched as the delay grew, eventually triggering the automated warning system 15 minutes later. The operations floor immediately became tense. Keith hurried over to Raymond's desk, looking panicked as he pointed at his tablet. Keith asked Raymond if he knew why the Horizon batch was lagging and requested that he fix it immediately. Raymond looked at his junior colleague, keeping his voice calm and even. He explained that he was currently completing a scheduled system audit and would address the issue as soon as his current task was finished. He suggested that Keith could review the standard operating manuals to see if there was a documented procedure for database synchronization lags. Keith blinked, clearly out of his depth, and went back to his desk to look for the documentation. He spent the next 20 minutes searching through folders, unable to find anything useful because the actual solutions were never written down. Raymond waited until the system reached the maximum warning threshold before he finally stepped in, resolving the issue using the standard slow interface rather than his custom VantSync utility. The fix took nearly 40 minutes instead of 9, and the client noticed the delay. For the first time, a small crack had appeared in the department's perfect facade, and Raymond had done nothing to hide it. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Raymond's personal telephone rang. The caller identification displayed a number he recognized but had not seen in a long time. It was Gregory Thorne, the vice president of global logistics at Horizon Shipping. Raymond answered, greeting Gregory warmly. Gregory did not waste time with pleasantries. He explained that Horizon Shipping was expanding its internal logistics tracking division and needed an experienced professional to lead their systems infrastructure. Gregory stated that they had watched how Raymond handled their data integrations over the years, noting that whenever there was a technical bottleneck, Raymond was the only one who could provide a clear and immediate solution. Gregory recalled that when Raymond was on vacation the previous summer, the data feeds had lagged for 5 days, causing massive backlogs that were only resolved when Raymond returned. They realized then that the stability of synergistic systems was not due to their technology but to Raymond's presence. Gregory offered Raymond the position of Senior Systems Director, with an annual salary of $145,000, full health benefits, and a remote work option. He remarked that they wanted someone who understood system reality, not just presentation slides. The offer was nearly double Raymond's current compensation, and it came without the endless layers of corporate approval that synergistic systems required. Raymond requested 24 hours to review the contract, which Gregory accepted without hesitation. That evening, Raymond sat at his kitchen counter, discussing the opportunity with his wife, Martha. He explained the financial and personal implications of the potential move. Martha listened intently, smiling as he finished. She told him that he had given Synergistic Systems 17 years of his life, and they had treated his loyalty as a cheap commodity. She urged him to accept the offer, pointing out that this new position would give them more peace of mind, allowing him to spend weekends with his family. Rather than responding to constant midnight database alerts, Raymond agreed, realizing that his health and family were worth far more than corporate loyalty. The next morning, Raymond signed the employment agreement, feeling a profound sense of relief. He then drafted a professional, concise resignation email and sent it to Preston and Brenda Jenkins, giving them a standard 3-week notice period. Within 30 minutes, Preston was standing by Raymond's desk, looking bewildered. Preston asked if the decision was final and if there was anything they could do to make him stay. Raymond replied that the decision was indeed final. Preston nodded slowly. Though he did not offer a counterproposal or ask about the specific salary Raymond would be receiving. He simply assumed that the department could manage the transition using the documentation Raymond had compiled. Brenda Jenkins scheduled a brief exit interview for the following Tuesday. The meeting took place in the same glass-walled conference room where Raymond had been denied his raise just a few weeks prior. Brenda thanked Raymond for his 17 years of service and asked him to complete a transition checklist. She asked if he was joining a competitor, and Raymond answered that he was joining a logistics firm to manage internal networks, which avoided any potential non-compete conflicts. Brenda checked the boxes on her form, offered standard corporate platitudes, and wished him success. Over his final 3 weeks, Raymond prepared detailed guides for his daily tasks, explaining how to restart services, monitor queues, and manage basic system alerts. He spent hours in meetings with Keith, walking him through the basic operational steps. Preston would occasionally look into the meeting room, nodding approvingly and remarking that Keith's business training would allow him to optimize the processes Raymond was handing over. Raymond merely smiled and continued the training. However, Raymond did not include the VantSync middleware in the documentation. He had no obligation to hand over software that was his personal property. Raymond met with his longtime legal advisor, a senior intellectual property attorney named Walter Shelby. Walter reviewed Raymond's original employment contract, confirming that because the VantSync software was written on Raymond's personal computer prior to his promotion, and because the contract contained no assignment of pre-existing intellectual property, Raymond retained full ownership. Walter helped Raymond draft a formal software license termination notice. Walter Shelby pointed out that under Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code, Raymond, as the author of the code, possessed the exclusive right to authorize or distribute copies. Walter explained that because the code was not created as part of his official job description, Synergistic Systems had no legal claim to it. Walter told him that if they continued to run the software after the license expired, they would be committing willful copyright infringement. The agreement clearly stated that the software remained the sole property of Raymond Vance and was licensed to Synergistic Systems on a non-exclusive, non-transferable basis, with the license terminating automatically upon the conclusion of his employment. On his final Friday, Raymond sent this formal letter to the executive team, notifying them that the license for the VantSync middleware would terminate in exactly 30 days, after which they were legally required to remove the code from their systems under Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code. He packed his belongings, shut down his computer, and walked out of the building. Raymond settled into his new role at Horizon Shipping, enjoying the collaborative environment and the clear appreciation for his technical expertise. His new office was quiet, located on the 5th floor of their modern logistics hub. He had a standing desk, 4 large displays, and a clean, quiet break room where he could get fresh coffee. He met his new team, a group of 6 skilled database engineers who were eager to learn from him. Unlike at his old job, they had a formal ticketing system, a proper development environment, and automated test suites. His manager, Gregory, valued direct communication and hosted a welcome lunch for Raymond, introducing him to the operations leadership. Raymond's team meetings were brief and efficient, focusing on actual technical challenges rather than creating vanity metrics for executive slide decks. Meanwhile, back at Synergistic Systems, the 3-week transition period had ended, and the reality of Raymond's absence was beginning to show. 4 days after Raymond left, the legacy database synchronization processes began to drift. Without Raymond's constant manual corrections and the silent efficiency of his VanSync middleware, small data mismatches began to build up in the system queues. Transactions were processed out of order, leading to inventory discrepancies and delayed shipping notifications for several major clients. Keith Bradley attempted to manage the growing crisis using the methods he knew best. He scheduled twice-daily status meetings, created detailed troubleshooting spreadsheets, and assigned tasks to the remaining operations staff. He spent hours drafting progress reports for Preston, attempting to frame the system delays as minor teething issues associated with the transition. However, none of the team members possessed Raymond's 17 years of systems experience. They could read the documentation Raymond had left behind, but they did not understand the underlying database architecture or the complex patterns of the data flow. When the synchronization processes began to drift, the legacy database started throwing thousands of validation errors. Keith, who did not know how to read these logs, assumed it was a network issue and contacted the network operations team. The network engineers ran diagnostic tests and confirmed the network was running perfectly. Keith then instructed his junior developers to write a Python script to bypass the validation errors. The developers spent 2 days writing a script that ended up creating circular references locking the primary transaction tables. Keith's team tried to write a replacement script, but their junior developers could not understand the legacy data mappings, and their attempt resulted in a total system crash. As the errors accumulated, the systems experienced severe database locks, which occur when multiple database processes attempt to update the same records simultaneously, causing the entire server to freeze. Keith, who had never encountered database locks of this scale, decided to reboot the servers during the middle of a massive transaction sync. This was a critical mistake. The reboot corrupts the database files, requiring a complete index rebuild. The operations floor, which was normally quiet, erupted into absolute chaos. Team members spoke loudly, phones rang constantly as clients called to demand updates, and Preston Fowler paced the floor with sweat dripping from his face. Keith sat frozen at his desk, staring at screens filled with red error codes, unable to explain the failure. The developers tried to manually copy transaction files over a basic transfer protocol, but the sheer volume was too high, and the manual queue quickly backed up by 12,000 shipments. On the fifth day after Raymond's departure, the legal department at Synergistic Systems received the formal license termination notice that Raymond's had sent. The letter, drafted by Walter Shelby, outlined the terms of the personal software agreement and cited Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code. The document warned that continued unauthorized use of the VanSync middleware beyond the 30-day grace period would constitute willful copyright infringement, exposing the company to statutory damages of up to $150,000 per violation. The lead legal counsel, a senior attorney named Richard Davies, immediately contacted Preston, demanding to know what the VanSync software was and how vital it was to their operations. Davies explained that if the company continued running this code without a valid license, they would be violating federal law, and the financial liability could escalate into millions of dollars given the volume of daily transactions. Preston, alarmed by the legal threat, called an urgent meeting with Keith and the IT leads. He asked if they could simply replace Raymond's scripts or run the database synchronization manually. Keith, eager to prove his capabilities, claimed that they could easily write a new synchronization script or handle the transactions using their standard tools within a weekend. Richard Davies remained firm, stating that running the software for even 1 day after the license expired was a federal offense. Preston ordered the IT team to disable the VanSync middleware immediately to avoid the lawsuit, believing they could manage without it. The moment the custom scripts were deactivated, the legacy database ceased communicating with the cloud infrastructure. The data synchronization stopped completely. Processing queues grew exponentially, and the operations dashboard displayed a critical system failure. Synergistic Systems was suddenly blind, unable to track shipments or process orders for their primary accounts. By the third week of Raymond's absence, The operational disruption at Synergistic Systems had turned into a financial disaster. With their database systems offline, they were unable to fulfill delivery schedules or process client requests. Horizon Shipping, experiencing massive delays in their own operations as a result of Synergistic's failures, decided to protect their business. Gregory Thorne authorized a reduction of their volume with Synergistic Systems by 15%, redirecting the contracts to a competitor. Other major logistics clients followed suit, unable to risk their own supply chains. The total revenue associated with the systems Raymond had managed dropped by 48% in less than 20 days. The board of directors demanded a full audit of the operations department. The board convened an emergency session, calling Preston Fowler to explain the catastrophic collapse. Internal auditors had uncovered that Preston had signed off on a department risk assessment report that claimed all core systems were fully documented and possessed redundant staffing, which was a direct lie. The audit showed that Preston had ignored Raymond's written warnings about the software license termination. Preston tried to blame the transition, but the CFO pointed out that Raymond had documented the standard operations perfectly, and the collapse was due to Preston's failure to secure a proper software license for the custom middleware. The board of directors realized that the entire disaster could have been avoided if they had simply paid Raymond the $96,000 he had requested. They had lost millions in revenue to save a few $1,000s. The board fired Preston for gross negligence and demoted Keith Bradley. Late on a Friday evening, Raymond was sitting on his patio enjoying the quiet weekend. His personal telephone rang, displaying an internal number from Synergistic Systems. Raymond answered, and a senior vice president of operations, a man named Donald Fletcher, speaking in a strained and urgent voice, introduced himself. Donald bypassed all corporate pleasantries and explained that they were facing severe database synchronization issues and begged Raymond to return as a short-term consultant. He offered to pay an hourly rate of $350 and proposed a flexible, remote schedule. He also offered to purchase a permanent corporate license for the VantSync middleware for a lump sum of $250,000, provided Raymond could log in immediately and restore the systems. Donald confessed that their legal department had warned them of massive liability under Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code, and they needed Raymond's help to resolve both the technical and legal crises. He had initially offered $200 an hour, but immediately raised it to $350 when Raymond remained silent. Raymond listened to the offer, feeling no anger or triumph, only a calm sense of resolution. He sat in the warm summer breeze, holding a glass of iced tea, listening to the crickets and the frantic breathing of the executive on the other end of the line. He reminded Donald that he had spent 4 years asking for a reasonable salary adjustment, and each time he had been told that his role was stable and that compensation could not be changed due to corporate guidelines. Raymond stated that the company had chosen to prioritize their rigid structures over the real-world value of his work. He explained that the price of his stability was $74,000, but they had decided it was too expensive. Now they were paying the price of their instability. Raymond told Donald that he was now fully committed to his new role at Horizon Shipping and had no interest in returning, even on a consulting basis. He added that any discussions regarding the VantSync software or the unauthorized use of his intellectual property during the transition period would have to go through Walter Shelby, his legal counsel. Raymond politely ended the call and placed his phone on the table. He sat on his patio for a long time after the call disconnected, feeling a deep sense of peace that he had not experienced in years. The quiet of the evening was a stark contrast to the constant mental checklists he used to run through every Friday night, wondering if the server would crash or if some transaction batch would fail. He realized that the stress he had carried for 17 years was not his burden to bear. By accepting the new position at Horizon Shipping, he had not only increased his income, but also reclaimed his personal life and self-respect. His new role did not require him to be an underpaid hero. It required him to be a manager and a mentor, and the organization provided the proper resources to make that possible. He walked back inside the warm house, poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, and smiled as he looked at his laptop, which remained shut. The system had run without him, and its failure was the ultimate testament to the value they had rejected. He walked inside his home to join Martha, ready to enjoy a weekend free of midnight alerts.